on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
Mushrooms are extremely interesting because of their diversity and because what they can tell you about the ecosystem.
It's like this childlike wonder around mushrooms. Plants don't really engender that same kind of a thing in people.
It smells like a cross between cinnamon, red hots, and dirty socks.
Mushrooms kind of like disassemble the toxin, demolecularize that stuff, and then remolecularize it into themselves. Like you can grow fairly clean mushrooms on oil.
This might be the first new drug to treat diseases of the mind like depression that we've had in 50 years.
The effect is not fleeting. The impacts are long-lasting for people. This molecule doesn't contain that bad trip you had. That's you contain that.
There's a lot of fungi out there, and there's even more bacteria. If you want to name something, become a microbiologist.
Episode 106 of the WildFed podcast, Mycophilia, Why Fungi is Fantastic, with Eugenia Bone, is brought to you by Surthrival. Why just survive when you could thrive? Surthrival.com is your source for nature-based nutritional supplements that keep you thriving in the modern world. From hormone health to immune support, increased metabolism to exercise recovery, Surthrival keeps you thriving when others are just surviving. Check out their pine pollen pure potency for testosterone support, colostrum for a smoothie ingredient that's 3 times more effective against the flu than vaccines, elk antler for powerful growth and recovery, medicinal mushrooms for immunomodulation and powerful antioxidant capability, and vitamin D3 for all the protective properties you've been hearing about during this pandemic. Go to surthrival.com to see the entire lineup and use the coupon code WildFed for 5% off your order. Surthrival. Why just survive when you could thrive? Hunting can be an incredible tool for personal transformation, helping you discover more about yourself, your environment, the animals you share this world with, and even helping you develop a deeper understanding of life and death itself. Hunting can help you find your place in the community of life. But you can hunt all your life and never find that kind of personal transformation. It takes deliberate practice, awareness, and sometimes even initiation. That's why my friend Monsell Denton created Sacred Hunting. Sacred Hunting brings new or experienced hunters out onto the landscape to stalk, harvest, and field dress animals in a retreat setting in conjunction with sweat lodges, plant medicine ceremonies held on separate days from the hunt, of course, and a strong intention setting that prepares hunters for a lifelong spiritual relationship with themselves, the land, and the animals they hunt. If you want to learn to hunt in this way, check out sacredhunting.com. There's only a few spots available on each hunt, so go to sacredhunting.com and complete their 2-minute application. Discounts are available if you let them know you heard about them on the WildFed podcast. Again, go to sacredhunting.com to learn more about Monsell Denton and Sacred Hunting. Go to episode 59 of the WildFed podcast. Again, go to sacredhunting.com and you can learn more about Monsell and Sacred Hunting on episode 59 of the WildFed podcast. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Eugenia Bone is a nationally known food and science writer and the author of several books, including Mycophilia, Revelations from the Weird World of Mushrooms, and Microbia, A Journey into the Unseen World Around You. Most recently, she can be seen in Fantastic Fungi, a new documentary you can see on Netflix that looks at the healing properties of mushrooms from the medicinal to the entheogenic. She's featured alongside other great minds like Michael Pollen and Paul Stamets. I highly recommend the film, and as you'll hear in this episode, Eugenia recently worked on the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook, which is a companion to the film. Eugenia was a real pleasure to talk to with her lively style and excellent grasp of all things fungi, from foraging to the most recent science. From cutting-edge cuisine to modern building materials, environmental cleanup to cancer treatment, and even psychotherapy, mushrooms are finally myceliating the Western mind and its formerly mycophobic culture. So here's to Microphilia, the antidote to the anti-mushroom sentiment of bygone days. The future for mushrooms is bright, if not partially decomposing and covered in spores. Eugenia Bone, welcome to the show.
Hey, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
This is a long time coming. Do you remember several years back? I don't know if you recall this. I'm sure you do a lot of media, but I was in New York and we were going to come to your place to do an interview. And we ended up having to cancel due to snow. Does that ring a bell at all for you?
Oh, yeah. I do remember that. Yeah, that was great. We all had a snow day.
We had a snow. Well, yeah. So it's about a 6-hour drive from me, from Maine, where I live, to where you are in the city in New York. And that ended up being a 16-hour drive home instead of 6.
Oh, no.
It was one of the most harrowing
that
drives in
sucks.
my living memory. I kind of, halfway through the drive, we're like, we should have just stayed and interviewed her
Yeah.
and, got a hotel,
You could have stayed over.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, we ended up having a really rough time getting home. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, I learned the limits of my dog's bladder, which was good.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, I was thinking she'd be home for, 10 hours maybe, and it's much longer. But she did great. So now I know. Anyway, long time coming. And since then, you have you've done some things. You've got another book out, and you also have been in the recent film on Netflix, Fantastic Fungi. So congratulations on your projects.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a relatively busy despite the pandemic restrictions. This last book that's coming out, the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook, was done 100% virtually, except for all the time that I was in the woods hunting mushrooms to use and test in the recipes.
Oh, cool. So you do you're definitely out there yourself, not just writing about it, but actually doing it too.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
I mean,
awesome. Yeah.
The foraging comes first.
Yeah, I like to hear that. Tell people kind of who you are, what you do, because in addition to being a forager, you're a professional writer as well, right?
Yeah, I write about food and fungi, sometimes microbiology, and I write, basically nonfiction. I develop recipes. I've been at it for decades, and I used to be the president of the New York Mycological Society, so I was involved in, recruiting people to join the club and all kinds of club activities. Now we've had a couple of new presidents since then, and everyone brings their own sort of vibe to it. Mine was very mycophagy heavy, the eating of mushrooms heavy. And I'm also a member of the American American Association of Science Writers. So I periodically, more than periodically, will write popular science, try to share basic mycology and some microbiology with readers.
Tell me about the book that came out, your most recent book, Microbia. That was 2018, right? I'm kind of curious about that book.
Yeah, so that book, what happened is that I wrote a book called Mycophilia about 10 years ago, which is about mushroom hunters, and it's really stories of mushroom hunts and stories about mushroom hunters that drops into the mycology. So you kind of get a little overview of mycology. And as I progressed in my own sort of learning arc, I became more and more aware and curious about the unseen world in general. Basically, I mean, in my mind, mushrooms are, macroscopic, but fungi are microscopic. So the study of mycology is the perfect gateway drug to microbiology.
Right.
So I started to get really interested in, what are bacteria? What are they? What are they actually doing? And so Microbia is a book about my own learning curve, kind of trying to understand the role of bacteria in nature. And it's a lot of subject to cover. But for me, doing the book was a revelation because now I have it's almost like I have new eyes.
I was going to say, it's like you must be able to visually almost overlay what you now know is there, in a sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Matrix. It's a superpower. Once you are aware of bacteria everywhere, it's a superpower.
Wow. I think about kids today who are, it's sort of like I grew up without having to ever think about, oh, wow, we have electricity, how lucky we are, and, kids grow up today, maybe don't realize that there was a pre-internet world not that long ago,
Yeah.
but we're kind of collectively like that with bacteria, right? That our understanding of this relatively new. Yeah.
Well, it's yes, relatively new. Certainly, the microscopic world is something that has become more and more clear over the last 100 years. Nonetheless, it's really hard, I think, for folks to conceive of something. It's so much easier when you can see it. That's why mushrooms are such a great sort of entree to microbiology, because you can see part of it. You can see part of the organism, and then it's just a little bit of a step to imagine what you can't see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, I just find this really fascinating. You wrote that book pre-COVID, right? That book came out in 2018, so kind of an interesting time
Yeah,
after
and then
there as microbiology comes back into people's minds, again.
oh, totally. I started to research a book on viruses because then I was like, well, what are viruses exactly? And I wanted to learn more and share that. And I was looking what was happening here in New York was people were rejecting measles vaccines for their kids. And so I started to attend some of the court cases that were going on here in the city. And I was preparing to put together a book on the subject. And then COVID hit. And, then we're all living it.
What are viruses, though? You know what I mean? Like, I'm fascinated by the topic. I look at bacteria and go, I understand what I'm dealing with here. This is a single-celled organism. Get it. I look at, fungi, like I understand what it is.
Yeah.
I don't want to hang out here too long. It's not my specialty, and I don't think it's yours. But what are viruses?
Well, they're like, the way I think of them is they're like rogue DNA.
Yeah.
They're just DNA. They're just possibilities.
Yeah.
They're DNA in search of a host to turn that DNA into proteins.
How though? Like, what does that mean for DNA? You know what I mean? Like, does that mean that DNA has a kind of, I don't want to say consciousness, but intention all its own outside of the confines of life?
Well, the scientists don't really describe viruses as living.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's like
but
outside of life, but that does DNA, or I guess RNA, does it have its own, like you could strip away life and then you have this thing that somehow has its own agenda outside of being alive.
Right. To reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
It's like reproduction precedes life.
Yeah.
I guess. If you're going to, I don't know, reduce it.
Yeah.
But I think Carl Zimmer just wrote a book on this very subject, like what is life?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think for those listeners who really want to dig deep into this subject, they may find some good commentary on this topic.
Zooming up a little bit bigger, bacteria, do they deal with viral load?
Yes. Bacteria,
so cool, right?
Viruses attack bacteria.
That's crazy.
And bacteria have methods of fighting off viruses.
Jeez, it's so wild. And then bacteria and fungi attack fungi, right? So it's like,
right.
Sometimes I think about medicinal mushrooms. I'm a big believer in them. I use a lot of them, particularly a lot of the polypore mushrooms. And I think these guys are good because they're protecting themselves all the time against these infections too. Eh?
Yeah, supposedly if they're utilizing certain chemicals to fight off, I mean, that's what penicillin is. People forget that that everything in nature has its way of surviving the day,
Yeah.
And utilizing it. Since fungi are pretty close to us in the tree of life, we're able to utilize it, whereas other things we can't necessarily utilize. So
take advantage of their tools.
Yeah, because their tools might end up hurting us. So.
What's the origin story for you? How do you get drawn into this world in the beginning? Fungi is I'm always teasing people on the show about just how kind of strange the mushroom characters I meet are. And so, you know what I mean? It really
totally
attracts.
True.
It attracts a unique type of person. And so, like, what drew you to it, and how did you find yourself there?
Well, I think that all right. So first of all, for a long time, I would write about mushroom enthusiasts as if they were separate from me. And at one point in time, someone said to me, you got to stop that because you are them. So just get over yourself.
Cool.
So now I fully embraced it. And I think that in my case, and I think that in the case of a lot of mushroom hunters, because we're involved in, a lot of us are involved in the culinary, but also in the mycology and the science. So there's a kind of, it's like wanting to eat, but having a real curiosity about nature. So I just have followed, I'm in the rather privileged position of being able to follow these obsessive curiosity tracks.
Yeah.
And what happened with mushrooms for me is I've been writing about food for a long time, and since I was a kid, and I've always loved foraging. I mean, when I was a little girl, I was into fishing and seining for whitebait and collecting moon snails and collecting mussels. We had a little cabin growing up. We had a little cottage in Provincetown, which is on the tip of Cape Cod in Massachusetts.
Cool. Yeah.
So I had access to a lot of seafood and stuff like that in the summer. And we were Italian Americans, so we didn't sail. We, went mussling, went looking for mussels. So I had always I was turned on to foraging early on. I felt that rush and exhilaration and connectedness to nature as a child. And so that stayed with me. I mean, I've hunted birds, I've hunted boar, I've done all kinds of things, but the type of foraging or hunting that appeals to me the most is the silent hunt. And that is the pursuit to look for things that hide versus chasing things that run.
Interesting.
So that's been my modus operandi for a long time, is mushroom hunting, clamming, oystering, that kind of stuff.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So across kingdoms, it's the things like that are sort of hunt. Yeah.
It's the type of hunt that is my turn on. But mushrooms are particularly exciting because of the variety and the seasonality. When a clam is a clam. Sorry, clam enthusiasts, but clam is a clam.
There's like 6 people out there right now who are like, "Hey,
I'm writing that. I'm writing that bitch right now." But the mushrooms are extremely interesting to me because of their diversity and because what they can tell you about the ecosystem, and that tends to be the wormhole, a pathway that I ended up following, because in order to find the mushrooms I wanted for my kitchen, because I'm a pot hunter, I had to understand a little bit about why they grew where they grew. Just that scratching the surface of mycology was enough to veer me deeply into understanding the operations of this kingdom, or as some people are saying, queendom of nature.
I haven't heard anyone call it that, actually. I like that.
Oh, yeah. The queendom thing is going strong. I mean, I think it's non-binary. Certainly the mushrooms would say that.
And I don't know that it's that hierarchical, but
yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
But it's certainly one of the most complex groups of life forms on Earth, and there are a shitload of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of species.
Their physical expressions can be startling sometimes too.
Incredible. And also just within the 10 or 20,000 edible or the 30 or so edible mushrooms that we collect here in the US, the variety of tastes are enormous.
Mm-hmm. And also, and I kind of beat this horse a few times on the show, but the fact that this is still an area where even amateurs can be making discoveries on a fairly routine basis is pretty excited in a world that seems to have been discovered and picked over and explored so fully. It seems like this area where things are still being shuffled in their genus, they're still being reclassified, renamed, and it seems like amateurs have a very large impact on the field, and it's kind of unique in that way. Or do you agree?
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, when you the truth is, I don't think that nature has been picked over very well by us at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of fungi out there, and there's even more bacteria.
Yeah. That's
If you want to name something, become a microbiologist.
I like that. Yeah, tell me a little bit about some of your favorite food mushrooms, and when you go out mushroom hunting, what are you after?
Well, it's seasonal, of course, and I tend to be when I'm hunting on the East Coast, I will hunt for. I'll look for whatever's up.
Hmm.
So right now, when we go up into the Catskills, I'll be happy if we find bluets, if we find Graphola frondosa, if we, maitake, I'll use common names. If we find yellowfoot, some late season chanterelles, did I say black trumpet? I think I did. And a few others. I did not. Okay.
Parisiums are coming, they're sort of up right now.
I haven't seen any yet. I would be awesome if we did because I love them. Cook them with fish. It's delicious. We're also finding chicken of the woods
Mhm.
and a few other, oyster mushrooms. Just beginning. So what I end up doing when I'm on the East Coast is I tend to get a mixed bag of mushrooms, and so I'll always make a forest blend, and I name these recipes based on the date because the date determines what I actually found. And I'll cook all the mushrooms separately and then mix them together in a light marinade that's olive oil, a little lemon, maybe some zest, fresh herbs, raw garlic. And I mix these and the cooked mushrooms and I mix them all together. And
You
then,
cook all the mushrooms, each species separately, you're saying?
yeah, I tend to do that.
Sautéed or how are you doing them?
Sometimes I roast, sometimes
Okay.
I boil, sometimes I saute. Kind of depends on the mushroom.
Okay.
So, like a chicken, I will cut in slices and I'll boil for a little bit
Mhm.
first, and then maybe finish to saute. Whereas the trumpet, I don't have to cook
So
it very
delicate.
long. So I
Yeah.
just yeah. So then I cook all of these different mushrooms separately, and I don't have a lot, right? I've got a handful of each.
Mhm.
And then combine them in a bowl with this Italian marinade, and then use it, on grilled cheese sandwiches and next to
Yeah.
steaks and all kinds of different preparations. And
Eugenia, can I have you back up and just walk me through that one more time because I want to hear it again. Because I'm going to do this now. So you
okay,
go out, you gather you got your mixed basket of different species. You take those
yes, you
home.
got your mixed edible species, right? You
Okay, and
take them home.
mhm.
And then you want to cut them into pretty much equal sizes. So, for example, I'll leave a little cinnabaris, those
Mhm.
little chanterelle cinnabaris, the
Yep.
little red ones. I'll leave them whole because they're tiny and they're
Oh
just
yeah.
so pretty and floral.
Hmm.
Um, the chickens, for example, I'll cut them into little strips. Anyway, everybody gets cooked according to their nature. So the chickens are a little tougher, so I might cook them. I'll boil them first. Maybe I'll just boil them. Others I'll saute, some I'll roast. Sometimes I do them all the same way. It just
But
depends on what's
these you're
in the
doing
mix.
without other ingredients, so it's not like you're not doing them with
Right,
onions and garlic
right,
yet because that's all going to come later. So you're
right.
right now it's just the mushrooms on their own.
You got it. They're
Okay,
all cooked. They're
cool.
all in their little piles,
Yeah.
and then they're combined in a bowl with olive oil, lemon juice. Sometimes I put a little lemon zest in there too. I'll often put chopped herbs like thyme, parsley, and I'll often put a stick of fresh rosemary in there.
Hmm.
Um, Minced garlic, really to taste. I give the whole, and sometimes put a little hot pepper in there too.
Nice.
Mix the whole thing together and then let it rest.
Nice.
The flavors merge, but you still can taste each mushroom distinctly, all their beautiful different flavors and textures. And it holds for about 10 days in the fridge. Um, I usually keep it for about the week until the next mushroom hunt. And I title these recipes based on the day
Give me an
that
example.
I found all the mushrooms. So, nine this is kind of off the top of my head. When was my last hunt? Week before last. So that would be like like 10, 1, 21. I had chickens, bluets, cinnabaris, a couple of chanterelles, black trumpets. And I think, and then I had some baby Griffola frondosa that
Oh,
cut
so
really
nice.
small. They were
Yeah.
so pretty. They're really just like little puzzle pieces, when they're
Right.
sliced. All of them cooked separately, combined, and that's the way I remember the recipe
Yeah.
is
Okay.
by the date of when I hunted and when I collected those mushrooms. So the recipe is named for the hunt.
That's fantastic. I really love that. And I think,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I think
cool.
I've been a little too monogamous to each species when I go out, it's like, I'm looking for this or I'm looking for that. I've never really done it like you just described. So I'm gonna start doing that. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. I came home today with some honeys. I was out squirrel hunting and, one of the things that occurred to me is I'm looking at them and I'm like, I haven't worked with them that much. So I was like, I'm pretty sure these are honeys, so I'm like on my phone, like looking at
Yeah.
pictures. And there's this tendency to want to identify things quickly from a photograph when you're new at this stuff. And I wanted to get
Yeah.
I wanted you to speak to people out there who are very new to mushroom hunting, outside of a couple of species. That's not really the way you do it. And it does, or at least my impression is the best way is to learn a little bit of sort of mycological identification. And I'm wondering if you can walk people through that so that they understand why you don't just go, yeah, that looks about right. We'll get right back to the show in a moment. But first, if you still haven't seen season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you can now stream all 10 episodes on demand at myoutdoortv.com. Myoutdoortv.com is Outdoor Channel's premium online subscription service. They host thousands of episodes of hunting and fishing content, making this a great subscription service for anyone interested in the outdoors. But if you just want to see WildFed, grab yourself a free trial subscription and then check out all 10 episodes at no charge. If you decide to keep it, it's just $9.99 a month. We're currently in production for season 2 of WildFed, which is shaping up to be an awesome season of new episodes, and they'll start premiering on the Outdoor Channel in 2022. Hey, thanks again for all your incredible support. Now, back to the show.
The main reason why you can't be less than 100% sure is that there are lookalikes in the fungal world, where a mushroom might look like a chicken of the woods, but if you're not paying attention to whether it has gills or not underneath,
Right.
it could be a jack-o'-lantern, and then you'd be like pooping your pants for a week. So it's important to know your mushroom. You have to be 100% sure. And IDs based on photographs can be problematic because it's a little bit like it's like you trying to identify me today from photographs of me when I was 10 years old and when I was 16 years old. Be really hard to do.
And
But
maybe even
when
looking
you're,
at pictures of your family and extended family, because the
yeah,
morphology can change so much. I mean,
well,
just looking at
that's the
honeys, I
thing.
saw 150 different pictures that looked so radically different from each other.
Exactly. Exactly. So environmental age, environmental conditions, and even a little bit of specimen differentiation based on location
Mm-hmm.
can all make a difference in your ID. So it's my feeling, and we used to say it, and we still say at the in our mushroom club, that you want to be 100% sure of your IDs, and the way to do that is use regional mushroom books, right? That
Mm.
really speak to your place, because there's going to be variations, and a regional book will help you the most. But more importantly than that, mushroom hunting is a skill that is best shared.
Yeah.
So if you learn, it's a community thing. Even though mushroom hunters are all like solo people, I go with my pals into the woods and I'm like, sayonara. We each go in different directions. And I don't come near me in case I find a patch. It's that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, if you want to learn how to find mushrooms, somebody's going to have to point them out to you. That's what I find the most effective, because then you can see in a patch of mushrooms, let's say a patch of chanterelles, you can see them as really small young chanterelles, you can see them as mature. You'll see some that have been bleached by sunshine. You'll see what kind of habitat they prefer. You start to spot that particular terrain that is preferred by this mushroom. So it's really kind of like appreciating the species, that particular species, on an environmental level, on the scale of its lifestyle level.
Mm-hmm.
It's a holistic approach to identification, for me, is the most effective.
And there's, you were talking about the New York Mycological Society. These kind of societies are fairly widespread and common now, I've noticed. Most areas, like it probably most people wouldn't have a hard time finding some kind of group that was within traveling distance for them to get out on one of these kind of, day forages with it.
Absolutely. I mean, the more temperate regions will have more mushroom clubs, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like
Right,
a
right.
lot of mushroom clubs in the Bay Area,
Probably not so many in
in
Arizona.
California. There's one in Utah.
Yeah. Right.
But there's one.
Yeah.
So and so it can happen. And the mushroom clubs, mushroom societies, associations, clubs, they all have different names. You can find out about them if you go to the North American Mycological Association website. That's NAMA. And they have listings of the clubs, all, Canada as well. So it's all of North America. With contact information, you can contact the president and say, well, what's coming, I want to join, what's coming up next. And the clubs will often organize forays, as well as educational lectures. So you can, these days it's all on Zoom. I do them all the time for clubs. I did one last night where, we get on Zoom and an expert talks about, particular species, or in my case, about cooking mushrooms.
The thing that I find really fascinating is how I'm sure this happens to you much more than it happens to me, but I routinely get photographs from people. What's this? What's this? Can I eat this? Can I eat this? And
Yeah.
I don't get a lot of photos from people of plants. I mean, I forage a lot more plants than I do mushrooms. People never go like, what's this plant? Can I eat it? It's like people send a picture of just about any mushroom they stumble upon. I'm sure you've thought about it. What's the excitement that it's like this childlike wonder around mushrooms that I see plants don't really engender that same kind of a thing in people?
I don't know, but I'm going to guess that it has to do with the fact that they may have a treasure in growing under the tree in their backyard.
Mm-hmm.
They may be that person who's got, porcini popping up in August underneath the tree behind the house, or morels or chanterelles. And they just want to know if they hit the jackpot, if that's like this mysterious gift from the soil that's coming their way. And I don't blame people one bit for hoping that's the case. But if they don't take really good pictures of the gills and all, and the underside, I'm like, screw that.
They send you those out of focus pictures
all the time. So I just write back LBM.
What's that mean?
Brown mushroom.
A little brown mushroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I get LWM, little white mushroom.
I get so many of those photos where I'm like, listen, I need to see a better picture than this. Or, I'm sorry to tell you that is an edible, but it's really past. Like I get a lot of those ones where people are holding like 15 pounds of like decaying maitake, and I just think like, oh, go back next year. It's probably going to be there.
That's good advice. That's actually really good advice, I think, because if folks, they find a mushroom and they're just beginning to like pay attention to them, maybe the first season, all they can do is, reach out in a kind of ineffective way. But maybe the next season, they'll be like, okay, I'm going to be sure now. I'm going to take them to a mushroom club ID session, or I'm going to, take better pictures of them and start doing some research. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about this process is that you get a second chance.
Yeah. Yeah. I often take GPS coordinates on mushrooms that I know will return so that I can come back
Oh
next
yeah,
season, and then I'll photo them and kind of use the location services on my phone so that I can determine where those photos are from. And then another thing I'll
oh
do
yeah.
is like, if I want to go foraging and it's, October 14th, then I'm going to look back at that date in my photo gallery and be like, okay, what was last October 14th and the one before that and the one before that? And it kind of gives me a sense of what I might encounter. Any
Yes.
tips or tricks like that you have for foragers?
Well, we try to. uh, Well, for example, have for many years spent summers or the latter part of summer, a month of August, at a place, a cabin we have in the Rocky Mountains, and for most of the time that we've been out there, I've been able to find, if there was rain in the monsoonal rain in July, we would find porcini in August, a beautiful Boletus rubriceps, which is a wonderful species in the porcini group. But lately, in the last few years, that's been kind of upended. The way that the mushrooms seem to be fruiting is there'll be a sort of a torrential rain instead of monsoonal rains where you have like kind of a regular rainstorm every afternoon for a month. There'll be 2 weeks of pouring rain, and then the mushrooms pop up and the season's over quickly. So I've seen that a couple of times, and I think it might be a reflection of changing climate because mushrooms are all about rains, right? So if the rain patterns change, then the fruiting patterns change, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes it more difficult for the commercial harvesters who are kind of expecting to be able to find these mushrooms at a certain time of year and make plans regarding their travels to do so. They're kind of being skunked because the regular seasons that people have gotten used to over the years seem to be changing.
The thing about the rains is, that is astute too, because it's like for the mushroom obsessed, the rains mean, here comes the flush. And
Yeah.
so, you've timed your foraging often around like wet weather, or just after the wet weather. I wanted to hear your opinions on the commercial mushroom foraging world. And you've no doubt watched the kind of explosion of growth there. And then your thoughts on, should this be something that's regulated? Would you like to see it stay in the kind of quasi? I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just very,
Mhm.
as a wild food person, and as a hunter and angler, I deal when I'm after protein. I'm in a highly regulated world that is the result of overharvest in the past, and
Yeah.
market, and that was really caused by market forces, not just, like when we look at, the loss of bison on the landscape, like it was really driven by market, and not some of the ways we thought in the past, but now we understand it was really free market forces. And so it's like, we have to be careful about the market because it can lead to that sort of, tragedy of the commons. So I'm curious, and then I go out to forage plants, and it's like, man, there's like it's like not really regulated at all in most cases.
Yeah.
And now mushrooms, I'm starting to see some. So yeah, I'm curious how you feel about all that. What do you see happening in that world? How big is that world? What can you tell us about the world of commercial foraging, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, there is a little bit of a controversy. It bubbles up in the mycological communities every once in a while, um, between those who think that picking should be regulated and limited, and those who say, "Hey, it doesn't matter if you pick the mushrooms. It's like picking apples. It doesn't, as long as you are respectful of the fungus will continue to produce mushrooms as long as there's rain." My feeling is it's not really picking that matters, it's habitat decline.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's habitat, there'll be mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
But if we don't, if we take away the habitat, or we privatize the habitat,
Mm-hmm.
then we limit the amount of picking. That we limit the amount of mushrooms that are out there for everybody to enjoy. It is an interesting situation when it comes to, like, for example, I'm a member of Ducks Unlimited because of my duck hunting. It makes sense to me that that ducks that a duck shoot that you have a limit for shooting duck. I totally get that. You also have limits for hunting mushrooms. Commercial hunters pay more for a license to pick than private citizens do. So if I try to go every spring to the Sierra Nevadas to hunt burn morels with my friend David Campbell. He has this kind of cool outfit called Mycoventures, and
like a guide service.
Yeah, to go hunt mushrooms.
Cool, yeah. Neat.
Oh, it's totally great, and he's the real thing, man. He'll hunt those mushrooms whether there's people with him or not. And he's really great. He's got this kind of he's like this big old grouchy guy, and he's got these kind of hooded eyelids and this attitude like if you piss him off, he'll just leave you in the woods.
What's his name again?
David Campbell. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
He actually knows an incredible amount about mushrooms, especially culinary mushrooms. Anyway, I got a little. Oh yeah, so I go and hunt bird morels with him, and why was I bringing that up?
Oh, I was asking. You were saying about paying different prices with your commercial. Yeah.
So we always I have to buy a license when I go to hunt in the Sierra Nevadas for those burn morels. Burn morels, a certain species of morels will come up in prolific numbers in a forest, in a burn site in a forest, the spring after a summer burn. So you have the summer, then you have winter rains, and then in the spring the morels come up. And it is really not hunting; it's harvesting. It's
for somebody like me on the
satisfying.
East Coast who like never sees. I mean, I'll occasionally see a morel or two. They seeing people come in with these, coming out of the woods with 5-gallon buckets just filled. Oh, yeah. It's like, oh, I'm drooling over that.
Have you ever had duck fever?
Duck.
You know what that is?
No.
That's something they say in the South. That's when there's so many ducks in the air that you can't shoot.
Yeah.
you got a fever.
Yeah, right,
you got a fever.
Right.
And so that's what it's like. That's what it's like collecting these burn morels. You have to buy a license. So as a private citizen, I spend, I don't know, it's $20 or $25. And then I'm allowed to gather, I believe, 5 pounds of morels at a time or something like that. I can't remember the details, and they may vary from year to year. And then the forest rangers are kind of patrolling around. I mean, certainly if you're off on a really rugged road, you won't encounter anybody. And that can be a problem if there's some trees down or you get stuck in the mud. Then you're just wishing that some forest ranger would come around and take your morels and get you the hell out of there. But but by and large, for private citizens, you can pick plenty of mushrooms. For the commercial people, what they'll do is they'll camp in the forest, and they will have designated camping areas. There's issues of garbage and waste, all kinds of human and otherwise waste disposal issues, and clean water, taking care of the forest in general, so it doesn't get too beat up. And so in general, the pickers who come to pick commercially, they pay more money, they get to take more mushrooms out, but they are corralled, if you will, into a specific campsite. and from that campsite, and there could be 100 pickers there, they will go out into the woods, collect the mushrooms, and then they sell to distributors who might even be parked alongside the forest roads, on the secondary roads or the main roads. And the pickers just bring their morels in, and then they're sorted by quality, and they do their wholesale sale, and then the distributors move them on to restaurants and wherever.
Well, I gotta get it. I gotta get involved in that at some point just to see it. I'd love to make one episode of my show about it. But where does this money go? Do you know? I mean, obviously, when we pay into hunting, for instance, that money's going back into the conservation effort. Do you know what happens with these license fees?
I think it's for forest operations.
Mm-hmm. Funds
that's
the forest
my
service,
understanding. Yeah, that's my understanding. It's like for local forest operations. I don't know. There's this one fellow who I spoke to a few years ago, who was a forest ranger on various burns over the years. I believe he was Montana. Anyway, he told me that in his opinion, wild mushroom harvesting was the largest legal cash business in the United
Wow.
States. Yeah. I think that has remained, maybe dropped a little bit since then. I talked to him when I was preparing to write Mycophilia, because um, in when the wild mushroom harvesting really kind of broke open in the U.S., I mean, there's a little bit of a history there. First, the people who gathered wild mushrooms were indigenous people, and then European settlers would collect the mushrooms that they recognized from their homelands. But the first, like, commercial pickers, in my understanding, were loggers in the Pacific Northwest. They were out in the woods and they were seeing the mushroom patches. So the logging industry began to decline. A lot of these folks started to pick mushrooms. But it really broke open when matsutake were sort of discovered in the Pacific Northwest. And there's a wonderful forager. His name is John Getz. He was a part of that initial scene. What was happening is that the matsutake are extremely valuable in Japanese culture. They were given as executive gifts, as wedding gifts. Perfect matsutake in a wooden box. I mean, it was a thing. So the Japanese were like going crazy for this beautiful matsutake that they could get fresh from the Pacific Northwest. And that really fueled wild mushroom harvesting, as well as the kind of, I would say, the opening up of American cuisine. Like when American cuisine started to be something, sort of with James Beard and
right.
going forward. And so, what came out of our country became more and more of, people started to really appreciate, and mushrooms were a part of that. At the same time, shortly after, not shortly, but after that, the Chinese wild mushroom industry opened up. So China became a source of matsutake, as did South Korea. I think they're also coming out of North Korea. And
something can
Eastern
come
Europe.
out of North Korea.
Yeah.
I'm amazed. I didn't know.
I think you can get a matsutake out of North Korea.
It's interesting.
People really love that mushroom.
Yeah, I guess.
For your listeners who aren't familiar with them, the matsutake is this really promiscuous kind of smell. It smells like a cross between cinnamon red hots and dirty socks.
Yep.
I mean, don't knock it till you try it. It's fantastic.
They're delicious eating, though. If anybody hears that and thinks like, I mean, they have that nice kind of spicy flavor too. I really like
but also that musky kind of, they're fabulous. Anyway, so then Eastern European mushroom, wild mushroom market opened up too. Not only the buying market, but the collecting. And that really sort of took a bite out of the American wild mushroom market. But we're still that the wild harvesters, they're still going strong, because there's also been an increase in American appreciation and desire for wild mushrooms. Mm-hmm. So it's still happening. It's still going pretty strong. From what I understand, there's still about 1,000 regular folks who regularly follow the mushroom trail and hunt the mushrooms that show up in your wild mushroom risotto at a restaurant.
The mushroom trail. I love that. That's really neat. Yeah. I want to ask you a question about the film you were in recently. That was a pleasure to watch. And one thing I wanted to say about it before, actually, my question, the video footage of, it's kind of like time-lapse videography of mushrooms growing. I mean, man, there's some stunning stuff in there.
Aren't they great?
Huh? Wow.
Yeah, Louis a master at that. He really is. And the fact that he's been doing it for flowers and, clouds and stuff like that forever. But he, when he got into mushrooms, he really tapped into something, because people weren't thinking about mushrooms at all. In general, we just don't. And it's like Gary Linkoff once said, because I watch a movie and nobody ever says anything. None of the characters say anything about mushrooms, ever.
That's funny.
Yeah, Gary. He was the late, great Gary Linkoff, who's probably turned more people onto mushrooms than anyone
He's
in this
an
country.
author.
Gary Linkoff has passed away a few years ago. He wrote the Audubon Book of Mushrooms.
Okay, yeah.
And
I'm
he's
looking at his
written
stuff
numerous
now.
books about foraging and things like that. And he was just a great teacher. I mean, going up hunting in the woods with Gary was a real hassle because he would take one step in the woods and then people would just start coming to him saying, "What is this? What is that?" So,
couldn't get anywhere.
You just didn't get, you didn't go anywhere.
Okay, yeah.
He was so knowledgeable. Anyway,
I've got some of his books in my library, but I didn't realize, I didn't know who he was. So it's cool to hear you say that. The other thing about the film is it really goes into and becomes largely about, at some point, about psychoactive mushrooms. And I was watching it and I was wondering to myself if you knew that was the direction of the film when you were in it, or were you brought in just to, were you asked just to talk about mushrooms? And kind of curious how you feel about that whole part of the film and that whole aspect of mycology in general.
So Louis got in touch with me many years ago. He had read Mycophilia, and he was, taking his time lapse stuff, which takes forever, right? It takes years he'd been doing that stuff for a while.
He's who made the film.
Incredible pictures. Louis Schwartzberg is the director, and he does this incredible time lapse.
That's his time lapse work. Okay,
yeah.
Because I'm watching this I'm going, okay, how would he ever get a hold of this footage, and what would it cost to license this footage? So that makes sense. It's his footage.
Yeah, he made it.
Okay,
and I believe there's some videos out. I think Wired magazine did a little story with him that shows how he does the time lapse, because it looks like it's out in the wild, but it's not. They're like sets.
Oh, that makes sense, because I was reviewing your scenes before talking to you today, and I caught one scene where there is no mushroom there, and you watch some decomposition of a pine cone, and then all of a sudden this mushroom comes up, and I thought, how did he get that? He would have had to have.
How did he know?
Pick a spot. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
he knew it was inoculated.
You can't. Yeah, he couldn't, and if it was out in the wild, he couldn't control light. And what is he going to leave his camera there?
Of course, right. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a real art form to, and a skill. It's like very crafty the way those shots were done, and took a lot of patience. And the payoff is, I think, humongous.
Yep.
But the way it worked out between the two of us is that he and I he started to call me up. He would call me up and say, "Well, what do you know about blah, blah, blah? And what do you know about, and who do you know? Who should I talk to?" And I just was like his friend, and we had a mutual interest. And so that went on for a few years. And then he said, "Listen, I want to come over to New York and, to some filming of you." And I was like, "Great, sure, no problem." And I'll tell you, this is how it went. He got the camera set up and he goes, "Okay, go." I was like, "Go where? Go where?" He goes, "Go wherever you want." And, so I did the best I could. And he ended up using what I had to say as he needed it, as he kind of wove this tapestry. I didn't know where he was going with the film. I was just there for him as needed because we share that interest, and it was no sweat off my back. But I think the film, represents his learning arc, just the way Mycophilia represents my learning arc, or Microbia for that matter. It represents a learning arc of the author or filmmaker discovering. And so he's going to follow the pathways that he is. I mean, he's very, he was very turned on by the way Paul Stamets communicates about mushrooms. And so we spent a lot of time with Paul. And so that's why Paul is in that movie so much. And then and then he became very fascinated with the psychedelic, the new studies in, the use of psychedelics to treat a variety of mental illnesses and problems. And I teach a class in in psychedelic mushrooms at the New York Botanical Garden. I do it by Zoom. And I'm very persuaded by the science. I think that it looks like this might be the first new drug to treat diseases of the mind like depression that we've had in 50 years.
Yeah.
I think it's very exciting.
So I'm glad you're amicable about the topic. One of the jokes that I've made in the past here is how when you talk to botanists, most botanists you meet have never tried ayahuasca or peyote. They typically, botanists have not experimented with, even though there are many plants that have psychedelic compounds. But I notice when you talk to mycologists, a lot more of them have dabbled.
Yeah.
And there's just something neat there that their consciousness has been touched by it, and that their neural network has been maybe adjusted by it or expanded by it. But could you tell us, for people listening who haven't heard about this, because it is very exciting what's happening. I believe there's even some publicly traded companies now who are in this field. And so, Stamets tells the story in there that he had a lifelong stuttering problem that, he claims was cured in one dose. I've certainly seen miraculous things happen for people and experienced it myself. And so just kind of curious, what's going on in that field and what are your thoughts about all that?
Well, it seems like what the mushroom is, let's back up. So we're talking about an ingredient or a collection of ingredients in certain species of mushroom. The mushroom genus that has the most psychoactive species in it is the psilocybes or psilocybes. Both pronunciations are correct. So the active molecule, the active ingredient is psilocybin. To a lesser degree, present in the mushroom is psilocin. There's another, even a lesser amount of something called baeocystin. And then there's a few other things. So there's like a little bouquet of psychoactive molecules present in these mushrooms. And they vary from species to species. When you consume psilocybin, which tends to be the largest percentage of psychoactive stuff in the mushroom, it passes through your liver, right? And in your liver, it dephosphorylates. It loses a phosphorus part of the molecule, the phosphorus, the phosphate. So then with a psilocybin. Psilocybin molecule without phosphate is psilocin. It's another.
So that's like the active
altogether.
form after passing through the liver?
Right.
Oh, I didn't
So
know that.
when you're tripping, you're not actually tripping on psilocybin. You're tripping on metabolized psilocybin, which is psilocin.
Which is also often present in the same mushrooms, but to a lesser
Which is
degree.
also, exactly. Okay. So the psilocin is able to slip past the blood-brain barrier because of its structure, and actually looks just like serotonin. Very similar. Yep. So similar that it docks into serotonin receptors on your neural cells.
Woohoo!
So and then, we can talk about the basic neurology, but what it does is it neurotransmitters like serotonin and psilocin will dictate pathways. Will dictate pathways along neurons in your brain. And the author, Andy Letcher, who wrote a fantastic book called Shroom, he put it this way. He said, when you take a mushroom, it's like finding an alien thumb drive.
Yeah.
It works in your computer.
Yeah.
But it does something quite different than any thumb drive you've encountered before.
Yeah. I always think of it like serotonin with a little antenna on it, that kind of picks up some different frequencies than you normally can pull in.
Well, I mean, actually, this is one of the things that these researchers are studying is what, is the psilocin pushing serotonin pathways further and deeper? Mm-hmm. Is the psilocin inhibiting certain pathways or disinhibiting other pathways?
Oh, yeah.
So,
I'm going to go with the latter personally, but okay. That's where I throw my bet.
Yeah. So, well, there's, there could be multiple things going on. I mean, that's not known yet. But the end result is that when somebody whose brain is in a kind of rut, like with stuttering or with OCD, and even other disorders like anorexia, these kind of behaviors, it, what the researchers are suggesting is that it's not your brain's not like a computer. If when you get a glitch on your computer guy says what? Says shut down, reboot.
Mm-hmm.
You can't shut down and reboot your brain because then you'd be dead. But when you're taking the psilocin, when you're on that psilocin for the 4 hours or so that it's active before it disintegrates, your brain is following different pathways. So it's essentially, and it also deregulates. It's known to deregulate certain parts of your brain, the parts that are involved with ego and self-talk and stuff like that. So it's like you're turning off your brain. It's like you're turning off your old brain, and then you reboot. And that's why after a couple of sessions, people are, saying, "Wow, it's like I've quit smoking."
Right.
Or I've stopped plucking my eyebrow hairs, or I've stopped stuttering.
Stop counting windows.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like a reboot.
Yeah.
But it has to be treated. It has to be treated like the strong chemical it is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of research to be done. For example, people who have schizophrenia, in their family, who may have a gene that can be turned on, it's possible that taking the mushroom could turn that gene on, and that would suck.
I've seen it.
Then you'd be
I've
sicker.
actually seen it. Yeah, I've seen it in 2 people who around 18 to early 20s who, at a time where friends and I were experimenting with plant and mushroom psychoactives, and just a couple of kids that I've known have become full-blown schizophrenics through that process. And it didn't take much. Well, I mean,
it sucks.
It sucks. It's hard. It sucks to watch that happen to someone, because you're like, it takes a while to realize it. Like, oh, they're not really coming back from this. They're getting weirder. But I have mostly seen just incredible breakthroughs. Now, I'm a big believer in the kind of set and setting thing, and not really in the recreational kind of party use. That sort of irritates me a little bit. I've never understood that, actually, because to me, anytime I've used them, it's been like I'm having, religious experiences. So I'm never wanting to be like in the party scene. But there's a study cited in the film. They're talking about, let's see if I can remember this, mice that have been bred for kind of neurotic fear response, and that they've been trained, kind of Pavlovian trained to, I don't know, a buzzer or a bell, they cower in fear. And then they were saying after a dose of this, they didn't respond that way anymore to that stimuli. And just thinking like, yeah, that kind of sums up for me a lot of what I've seen with people. Curious, is it something that, obviously you don't have to answer this, but it's something that you have done, like to do regularly, do occasionally, never do? Where are you at with it?
So the first time I did magic mushrooms, I was like middle age, like soccer mom. Not really soccer mom. I'm Lower Manhattan, so I'm like Lower Manhattan version of it. But nonetheless, I was like a mom and writing my books and stuff. So I was like kind of paranoid about the first time.
Already into mushrooms at this time? Like
no. Oh yeah, I was, But the thing is, and I thought taking a mushroom would be part of this journey I was on. And the truth is, in those days, nobody, and I went to forays and festivals all over the country. I was just so into it. But it was rare, if ever, people would mention psychedelic mushrooms. They were like this, all of this psilocybin mushrooms were like the black sheep of the mycology world.
All right.
Only the Telluride Mushroom Festival paid any attention. They were the only ones. So I went there. And I took some mushrooms, but I was very nervous about it because I hadn't before. And I was like, well, what if I get arrested? How,
Sure.
What if I don't know, what if the FedEx guy shows up?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I just didn't know what to expect. But what my experience tells me is that the mushrooms, in the future, when we kind of get a grip on administration and dosing,
Yep.
can be very, very helpful for people who are otherwise healthy as well. So to use the mushrooms if you're suffer from depression or other psychiatric disorders, that's one thing. But I am great. Thankfully, I don't have any major problems of that sort. So what did the mushroom do for me? It benefited me in a way that I didn't expect at all. So if you want, I can tell you briefly what went down.
Please.
So I took the mushroom. I didn't take a humongous dose, so I was able to be kind of mobile. And I went up on top of the mountain above Telluride with some other people. And sorry, while I was up on the mountain, I had a few kind of revelations that aren't going to mean anything to your listeners. Stuff like, how I relate to my family and how they relate to me. But I had one revelation later that I will share. So I went down after a while on the mountain. A little storm brew up. It's very typical in the late afternoon in Colorado, and so some of the people I was with got a little freaked out. And so we went back down into the village, and I went into my hotel room, and I thought, okay, I'm going to take a bath. That sounds good. Well, bath time can be tricky for women my age. You get in the tub and you're like, oh, shit. What's happened to me? I'm getting older. I look like, And I was afraid that if I took a bath, that I'd have a bad trip,
Right.
Which is actually just an anxiety attack. But nonetheless, I thought, I could have a bad trip and maybe I shouldn't. But my desire for the warm water and so on was enough. I get in the bathtub, and then while I was in the tub, I had this vision of my body as a ship, probably because I was floating in water. But I had this vision of my body as a ship, and it was taking me through life. And that's what made it beautiful. It was seaworthy.
Yeah.
Who cares that it's a little shabby? It was seaworthy. And it was this tremendous sense of relief, this unburdening of the guilt of losing my looks and getting older. And that was 10 years ago, and I still feel that today.
Yes. That's what's so great is the effect is not fleeting. It's
Right.
The impacts are long lasting for people. And, I want to go back to what you said a moment ago, too, about the anxiety attack, because I've often noticed that, I'll try to point out to people like, hey, this molecule doesn't contain that bad trip you had. You contain that. That's your stuff.
Yeah.
That's what's going on behind the scenes. And it got, it's now brought to the surface for you to look at. And those bad trip experiences are sometimes the best thing later on because you process through some kind of shadowy stuff. I mean, that's stuff that can take therapy a long time to get access to. So I think that those things can be really good, within limits. The other thing I think is fascinating about them is the visual hallucination part, because I think to the uninitiated, they think you're going to see made up stuff, and that's not really what happens, right? It's like pattern recognition takes over in your brain, and you see things that are there, but that you almost don't normally notice or overlook, like patterns that you don't realize. Do you know what I'm saying by that? It's not
Totally.
like, it's not like all of a sudden there's clowns in the room. It's like, no, I'm looking at what I'm normally looking at, but I'm seeing things that I almost, like you said about worrying the FedEx guy's going to show up. And that's what's neat about it too, is I'll often think, I should go around and childproof the room. Who knows how I'll act? And then whenever it kicks in, you're like, oh, I'm smarter than normal right now. Like I know myself better right now, not worse.
I know, that's so true. Yeah. I mean, I could read the paper, but I couldn't drive a car. Well,
Right.
actually, let me put it this way. I could actually order a coffee in a cafe, but I couldn't really read the paper.
Yeah, exactly. I probably wouldn't want to.
No.
Yeah.
Well, the anxiety thing is people worry about bad trips and stuff. The mushroom doesn't hurt your organs or anything like that. It's ultimately, and it's out of your system in 4 hours. But the set and setting, which you mentioned earlier, is certainly in these trials that are going on for psilocybin's use in the treatment of depression and other disorders. That whole point of set and setting is to create an environment where you won't get anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And, the visuals and stuff that people see has a lot to do with how much you take. One of the most common effects of taking this molecule has to do with the reach and transmission of neural cells, where they're going, and what seems to be happening with this when you take the psilocybin is that it connects different regions of your brain that aren't normally connected, and as a result, you may experience something called synesthesia, where you might see numbers as colored, or hear sounds and you might smell sounds, things like that. It's a cross communication of senses. This is very, very typical. There can be visual effects. Like I remember when I was on the mountain in Telluride, this is another time, this bee spinning by, buzzing by, and I could see the air behind it disturbed. It's very lovely. Yeah, and there's also this kind of connectedness that you can get in a natural setting, maybe less so if you're, stuck in a pandemic apartment with somebody you're getting ready to divorce. If you're out in nature. I remember looking over this glorious vista of Rocky Mountains, red rocks, green forests, blue sky. And it seemed like the entire vista was respiring. And I ended up kind of joining in it with,
yeah.
And it's a real sense of communion and community. And that is something that's also very typical. And in the movie, Louis spends a lot of time on it. This sense of feeling like your destiny is really a part of the greater destiny. Yep. The fear of death becomes less horrific when you are able to truly open to the notion that it's everyone's destiny and you're not alone. And that's a wonderful effect. Yeah.
What's that worth? It's just sad to me that you could go your lifetime and not experience it, but it seems to be changing. I wanted to say one of the things I really appreciate about, I really love that you named your book Mycophilia. I feel like injecting that into the public consciousness is so important because there's been obviously a microphobia for a long time in our culture. It's around the psychoactive part. It's around the culinary part. It's around even touching them sometimes for people. And there's this part we just talked about, the therapeutic benefits. We've talked a little bit about the culinary benefits. What else do you see happening in the future, as our awareness of the role that mushrooms can play for us, outside of just ecologically, but the role they might play socially and in our society? Like, what other kind of applications do you think are exciting for the future?
Well, imagine people suddenly discovering that plants may provide useful byproducts. I mean, it's just on the cusp of being discovered. So there's the degrading aspect of fungi. There's fungi live different ways, right? And this saprobic fungi that break down plants. So it's really the potential of fungi as decomposers and recyclers is tremendous. And that's being looked at by a lot of different people. The role of fungi mycelium, which is this, I don't know if your readers or your listeners are aware of the organism's nature, but filamentous fungi versus single-celled fungi like yeasts. Filamentous fungi will grow in these long threads that branch and rebranch in every direction they can, as long as they have food to grow into, fungi being an absorptive organism that lives in its food. And so this mass of branching filamentous fungi are little thin threads, which, every tip and all along its side is a food absorption point. They can web together, almost like felting together, to create a rather durable material that can then be utilized in all kinds of ways, depending on, further treatment. So that's why you're suddenly seeing, pleathers or whatever, not pleathers, but fungal leathers showing up, and fungal materials showing up in fashion. I think Stella McCartney just did a big fashion show.
Oh, no, cool. That's cool. I didn't know that.
All of this fungal, this material based on fungi, on filamentous fungus, on mycelium.
Wow.
And
with properties a bit like plastics almost. or more
Yeah,
like
I mean,
fiber?
some of them, they can be stretchy, they can be solid, like insulated blocks. That's the kind of stuff that Ecovative does. There's a number of different opportunities um, to make to make products, to make useful biodegradable products.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you add water and that fungi starts to disappear.
Yeah, those rains we talked about. Yeah, I was thinking too about I always think like about the landfill problem that we have, but I imagine a day where we're basically sending them in there to break down all those plastics, all those hydrocarbons. And I always think it's so neat that, if you put a plant on something kind of toxic, usually the plant uptakes that toxin, but mushrooms kind of like disassemble the toxin and then like demolecularize that stuff and then remolecularize it into themselves, right? So it's sort of a different, like you can grow fairly clean mushrooms on oil. That's true, right?
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. So mushroom, what happens is the fungus, it's really tiny. It's too tiny to have a stomach. So it digests outside of itself. Out seeps its enzymes, the equivalent of gastric juices. And then it breaks down whatever it is that it's programmed to eat. And then it absorbs the micronutrients, water and minerals, iron and phosphorus and carbon, right? So the fungus can break things down to a very small size, but it can't break down things that can't be broken down, like a heavy metal.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, there's this one wonderful mycologist, Tom Volk, who says, you know what? The mushroom is kind of like a toilet. When the fungus encounters something like mercury, which might be part of some sort of Superfund site, right? When the fungus encounters mercury, it doesn't like mercury either, and
Right.
it dumps that mercury into the mushroom, where it's outside of the fungal body,
Right, because the mushroom is the fruit body, not the organism.
Yeah, and then then it's out, it's gone, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And so then we eat the mushrooms, and then we can potentially, if we ate enough of them, could potentially build up enough mercury poisoning to screw our kidneys.
Yeah.
And in fact, that has even happened to a member of the New Jersey Club, a wonderful gentleman, now deceased, who for many, many years collected morels underneath apple trees in a abandoned apple orchard. And what he did is he ate these morels growing under dying apple trees for many years. Turns out the apple trees had been sprayed with lead, arsenic, pesticide. But that was they stopped doing that in the 70s.
Oh, but it was persistent.
But lead doesn't get any smaller. Lead is lead, right? It's as small as it can be. So the fungus was delivering the lead to the mushroom. I don't want lead in my entity, my organism. So I'm going to dump it into my toilet, which is the mushroom. And this gentleman was eating those mushrooms. And over time, he developed lead poisoning.
Wow. Don't eat the mushrooms at the shooting range.
Right. Now that's a correlative.
Yeah.
So there's, but this woman, a wonderful ethnomycologist, Eleanor Shavit, did the work on that. And you can find her papers online. I think she might have published it in Fungi magazine. Yes, there is a fungi magazine, and it's great. It's, it's for nerdy people. It's for bloated pleasure seekers with a scientific bent.
I'm subscribing right now.
Yeah.
I think I fit
You're
the bill.
a perfect audience.
Man, I've really, this has been really fun talking to you. I want to just, obviously people, we want them to get your books, of course. And then you've mentioned so many authors and so many different folks. For people who, want to get into mushroom foraging, I'm curious, since we're, really a food show, what are your kind of top picks for, I guess identification and foraging books?
As I said before, it's all about your regionality.
Yeah.
Look for books that focus on your place. I mean, as small a location as possible will be the most accurate. But you can also use things like iNaturalist. Join a mushroom club.
Yeah.
There's no better way. And plus you'll learn so much. You'll learn so many other things about mushrooms. You'll learn about mycology, not just what to pick for the pot.
Yeah. And then tell people about where to find your work. And you've got great, I love how on your website, you're like, you have links to where to get your books. A lot of times it's like that whole thing. Where do you like people to get your books? But where do people find you, and where, social media, website, all that stuff?
So I have a website, eugeniabone.com. I don't really update it as much as I should. I am a little better on Instagram at Eugenia G. Bone. But in general, it's not my strong point to do PR. That said, my books are my books are out and about, and you can find them. My Mycophilia is it's still in publication, it's still selling all these years later, and it's a really great introduction to foraging. What's the foraging community, and not just the professionals, but people like me who go out and hunt for fun, as well as some basic mycology. I also have a book of basic microbiology called Microbia, about the challenges of learning that learning about that topic, and the challenges and the incredible rewards. I think my last cookbook I really loved. It was called The Kitchen Ecosystem, which is a look at which is organized from apples to zucchini, and it includes recipes for eating fresh, preserving the food, using the preserves, and then using the waste stream.
I'm going to order this book. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah,
this looks really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that book. My most current book is the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook. So what that is that last year, Louis Schwartzberg, the director of the Fantastic Fungi movie, reached out and he said, I really want to do a cookbook, and I want you to do a cookbook for me. And I said, well, there's a lot of good forager chef cookbooks out there, and who needs one by me, frankly. I was like, I don't think so. But I realized that over the course of the year or two before the pandemic that Louis had brought out his film, he self-distributed in the beginning.
Oh,
now
okay.
It's on Netflix. But originally, he took that film to every little theater in the country, and he introduced it, and he shared his notion that fungal mycelium is a metaphor for community action, how we all do better when we help each other. And really, that's been a message that's resonated in the last few years in a big way with a certain audience. So all those people, they gave him their email addresses, and he had built this kind of community. And so that's when it hit me. I was like, let's do a community cookbook.
Oh, yeah.
I love community cookbooks.
Yeah.
They're so awesome. They're like things you actually make for dinner, and they're really authentic and unpretentious and well tested. So we went through a few hoops, and we figured out how to reach all these folks. And I put together a collection of 100 community sourced recipes that are fantastic, and they're unusual, and they're simple, and they're stuff that you'll actually make for dinner, like chicken wings with wood ear mushrooms, a recipe from Hunan. The author is this gal Kathy in San Francisco. Her mother made the dish, and her grandmother in Hunan made the dish, and it is like perfect and delicious. So I have 100 of those recipes. And then we got a fantastic photographer who I'd worked with at the Times, New York Times. His name is Evan Sung. And Evan, I reached out to him in the height of COVID when there wasn't a lot of work. So Evan's like a big shot food photographer, right? But there wasn't a lot of work going on. And he had just been down to Chile, where he met Juliana Furci, who's got the Fungi Foundation, a wonderful organization. And so he was all into mushrooms.
Cool.
So we got Evan aboard.
That's awesome.
And we ended up putting together this really elegant but intimate community cookbook.
All right.
And it comes out very soon.
I'm sold. Oh, it's not out yet. It's a pre-order?
Yeah, December 7th it comes out.
Okay. Wow, you got me sold on this one. Yeah, it was a good pitch right there.
Oh, it's so cool. I just today made the porcini. You use dried porcini powder.
Okay.
Porcini powder onion dip.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Oh my God.
Really?
Yeah. Shake up that martini. It is so good.
Cool. Any before we go, any hints about what you think you're going to be writing about next?
Well, I'm very interested in the notion that if you look under the hood of Bible stories and myths and folk traditions, what you'll find is microbiology. So that's kind of what I'm looking at these days.
Oh, that's exciting. Cool. All right. Well, keep us posted, and I'd love to hear more when that project comes to fruition. You've been so fun to talk to today. Thank you for all your incredible work. It's just been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel. The pleasure has been all mine. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. Help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you can go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 10 episodes. Season 2 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2022. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.